Please move to the first item of the agenda, which is the chairman. Mr. Brecken was nominated chairman-elect at the last council meeting held on June. I please and this is agreed and ask for a seconder. Nominate Mr. Bedford. I do look forward to working over the coming year. Thank you. I'll try the microphone this time. Not used to being in the room. Item 3. Firstly, we need to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of February 2022. These are on pages 3 and 6 of your agenda pack. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of February 2022 be taken as read, confirmed, and signed. Can I have a seconder, please? Okay, I'll take those. I'll sign those after the meeting. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is question time. I've received no questions from any members of the public. Item 5, questions asked by members under standing orders 7.3 and 7.5. I can confirm I've received no questions from members. Item 6 is to advise of any items that the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I can confirm that there are no urgent items to be taken. Item 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on this agenda. Can I ask if any members have any interest in respect of any items on today's agenda? Linda.
I have interest in the adult learning. My daughter is actually named in the report.
Okay, fascinated. Any other members? Okay.
Are you declaring? Are you going to leave the room for that item, or are you going to remain? Okay, thank you.
Okay, officers are happy with that. Item 8, presentations of petitions under Standing Order 35. We have no petitions presented today. Item 9, our first report is on the People Strategy update, and this is on pages 7 to 32 of your agenda pack. We have Caroline Fairchild here today, who's Head of People Services, and will present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for my introduction. So yes, I'm Caroline Fairchild. I'm Head of People Services, and I will now take you through the report. So the purpose of bringing this report to Employment Committee is basically to provide a progress update on the work undertaken to date in relation to delivering the Council's People Strategy. It builds on the work that was presented to Employment Committee at its meeting on the 4th of February 2021. Paragraph 2 sets out the purpose of the People Strategy, which is essentially to devise a work plan to support its workforce in being able to deliver the Council's strategic plan. There is an emphasis on performance, productivity, that our workforce has all the necessary skills and knowledge, and also in our position as the employer, we give an excellent level of support for helping to maintain well-being and the mental health of all of our staff. Paragraphs 4 and 5 presents the background to the report, namely how the People Strategy was developed, and it lists the 3 key themes which were adopted, these being performance management, leadership, and workplace and culture. Turning to paragraph 7, this touches on the fact that the People Strategy also supports the delivery of the Council's Ways of Working programme. In particular, this is in relation to leadership and management and the cultural changes that need to be brought about to secure success, namely to realise the benefits of that Ways of Working programme, which it has set out to achieve. Pages 9 to 14 set out all the principles that we've agreed for delivery and gives for each an update. I won't go through all of these line by line, but if I may, I will just pick out a few to highlight from the table. So turning first to executive coaching, this is the first time the Council has put in place such a programme of this type for its senior leaders. The pilot was extensive, and it did actually include a director and assistant director together with a number of heads of service. The content of each of the coaching sessions is set by the individual, with the coach who has extensive previous experience of having worked in local government, so they can explore those issues and the various ways forward in those areas where the person being coached is looking to improve. There was a lot of strong and compelling evidence that was received from the pilot of programmes of work has been workforce and succession planning. Mental health and wellbeing are a key part of all of our leaders, managers and supervisors' agendas to provide support to our workforce for their mental health and wellbeing. In particular, as members will appreciate, a highlight was placed on this during the COVID months for a number of very well-known and understandable reasons. All of those have been incorporated within the Council's Managers' Charter. A corporate working group is now in place, delivering on an action plan, which includes a number of priorities on supporting staff with stress, anxiety, sleep issues, and adopting a healthy lifestyle. Just to note, and it may be a point to come back to on questions, but we are currently considering the support the Council may be able to give supporting staff with their financial well-being. In terms of recruitment and retention, a lot of detailed work is being put into this project to support the Council in being able to recruit and retain its staff, particularly in those areas where it is known that we have a number of hard to recruit to posts. A new recruitment system will be put in place early in August, accompanied with a number of changes to refresh our website, our recruitment website. The incentives policy is now being more widely applied, which is helping both recruitment and retention, with the use, for example, of golden hellos and the payment of market premium, all of which are obviously subject to the approval of a business case. And finally, we have also introduced for our employees a new employees benefits package. Regarding the way we work, as mentioned earlier, this project work supports the Council's ways of working programme. We have, for example, provided a comprehensive training programme on the use of office technology to enable smarter and remote working. Our OD advisors have provided a number of training courses to managers to support them in managing in the new hybrid world. And we have also designed and published a new intranet page, which gives further information to our workforce on our ways of working smarter policies, updating a number of HR policies where it's become relevant to do so. And that also includes the advice and support we give on health and safety. Performance management information, efficiency and productivity is obviously a key component of the people strategy and the ways of working programme. Work has commenced on scoping this project, which has a project dependency on the ways of working pilots, which are currently being run in two of our departments, adults and communities, and environment and transport. And also it is incumbent upon our ability to produce workforce data from our new Fusion system. Paragraph 10 on page 15 sets out the resource implications for all of this work. The people strategy is a key piece of work for people services, but we are being supported by colleagues in other support services, together with some additional temporary resources that have been put in place. This therefore leads me to the recommendation, which is to ask Employment Committee to note the content of the report and to ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks for a good report. I'd note, I mean, the only comment I could quickly make that there was a page on the strategy that was included, which sort of links, and I think it was page 21 in the agenda pack. And certainly on my mod.gov, it was just a blank page. Our people strategy is about, and it was the link to, I think they're links to videos where people can click. So obviously, as a printed document, it just becomes a blank page. But I actually thought the strategy was really easy to read, well laid out, and yeah, document. So, right, questions, Barry.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of on page 10, as you said, that there's been a positive outcome. 2 individuals have been promoted. That's internally. Were there any external promotions at the same time?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so
but definitely 2 internal promotions, which we're really pleased with.
Okay, that's good. Just to make sure that it wasn't like 10 outside and 2 inside. And then page 23. So figures look good, 90-odd%, etc. Feel happy where they are. But when you look at, you've got 6,087 staff. When you take the flip side of that, that means you've still got 560 staff that feel they're not treated with fairness. 505 feel that they're not trusted to carry out their job. 389 believe that they're not a good employer. And 442 think we're not committed to equality and diversity. So what are we doing with that? And with this survey, was this, do we know who the people were that you could go back to find out, or is this an anonymous survey?
It's an anonymous survey, but what we have done further to receiving the results is within each department, we have allocated a HR OD business partner. And that business partner is also a respective member of that department's senior departmental management team. So that each department, in terms of their departmental management team, has been doing some follow-on work. And they've put in place, for example, in one department, a focus group that's come together of volunteers that is a place whereby people can talk quite openly about their thoughts, their views, their experiences. And then what that department is doing is putting those into an action plan to see, what actions, positive actions can be taken to bring about some improvements. And that's working quite well.
Thank you. So with the survey, as you say, it's anonymous, but was there addition when someone said, no, I don't think we're committed to equality, was there an extra box for people to put in their reasons? So did we get that information? Because obviously it's quite vital information. It's great to have the 90 odd, but put that to one side, it's the small amount that you've got to deal with. I take it the survey was an internal one. And obviously people will say things anonymously, but they won't necessarily want to step up. Is it also worth considering at some stage that if we had something done where it was an external survey, where people felt that they could discuss anything that they wanted to with someone and that information wasn't coming back, who they were, etc., you might get some really good data out of that as to what. Thank you.
Sorry. Just picking up the point around equalities as an example, because there's some corporate work going on in part as a response to the staff survey and in part a response to just what we know about the feedback we get around equalities. So, for example, we had quite a bit of feedback from a BAME focus group and others around perceptions on ability to progress, for example, through the organisation. We got an external consultancy in. They had some in-depth conversations with people, and we've now got an anti-racism task group chaired by one of our directors. And we're also doing quite a lot of work on disability as well, because you'll see in the staff survey that, and previous staff surveys, there's a pattern of staff with disabilities are less satisfied with a whole range of factors than others, and even others with protected characteristics. So just a couple of examples that we were trying to get into more of a deep dive beyond those headline figures. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Very much, Chair. Just a few comments, really. There might be some questions in there as well. I think it's really easy to read report, which is really helpful. On page 9. Bullet 9 mentioned about the coaching that's going on between senior managers and managers, which I think is a really good thing. I think particularly with the new ways of working and more agile working, really important that that knowledge is transferred and those kind of learnings and upskilling takes place. I think that's really good to read that's going on and that's continuing over the coming years. I do have a question around on page 13 about the attendance management capability. I think there's a comment that said the absence data wasn't available when this report was written. So if you've got any kind of up-to-date data on that you can give us some insights on as to the trajectory of that and where that's going. And finally, on page, I'll just scroll back down, page 20, which is page 4 of the actual document, where you've got the 4 boxes, building back stronger. I like, I like the fact that we focus on, the kind of strategic objectives there around supporting, leaders, as I mentioned, in terms of the coaching. And it mentions there about the new agile ways of working, which obviously falls under my cabinet responsibilities, and ensuring that it's. I mean, I view the people strategy as supporting the overall strategic direction of the council. It's that way round in terms of, we as a council have to provide a good quality service to our residents, and I think this strategy helps develop our people internally to deliver that. So I'm glad that's pulled out in that section as well. So I think I've got a few questions in there. I'm back over to you.
Shall I just pick up the first one around attendance management? You're absolutely right. We've had some, I'll just call them technical challenges in getting accurate data out of the system, and doing a lot of work behind the scenes to resolve that. I'm not going into the technicalities because I'll probably lose myself. But suffice to say that we've managed to get some data out, which we're going to talk to CMT about, with a view of starting to bring reports again to Employment Committee, hopefully from September. The direction of travel is we reduced absence down to just around the target during COVID, but that was a trend that other councils saw as well, for the whole range of obvious reasons that people weren't mixing, etc. So we got just down to, for the first time for an awful long time, down to about 7.5. It's looking like it's gone up by a couple of days or more per person. And again, we've just done some checking with other counties, and the trend has been the same. So range of factors, whether it be long COVID, whether it be delayed operations, delayed cancer care, people just mixing, getting other illnesses that they weren't getting when they weren't mixing. So we have a conversation to have with CMT around what we now do about that, as well as the reporting. But we will start to, I'm hoping, bring regular reports back to this committee, because they should be standing items.
In terms of our targets for absence and sickness leave, as we transition to this new way of working and more agile model, are we going to review our kind of targets on that in light of that? Because clearly, if people aren't physically in an office 5 days a week, there may be some other factors, and we need to factor into our overall kind of targets for that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because whether we review the target itself, because it's kind of a notional target, 7.5 days, and even if we achieve that, we want to keep going. But I think the important bit is to measure as well as we can the impact of hybrid working, sickness absence, and whether it's seen as something that's built into the business case, seen as something that helps to reduce sickness absence in the same way as working remotely did under COVID. There are obviously a huge range of other factors, and the context that we're working in now, low pay, etc., cost of living, these are all stressors. So we've got a huge range of factors why people will go off sick, but we need to look at hybrid working as one of the potential things amongst many that we do to help.
So I've got one follow-up to that. So in terms of reporting back on those numbers, so it's the plan to bring that data back to future employment committees. So I think it's really important to understand as well the trends. So, as people are working at home more independently and in isolation, is that having an impact on certain types of reasons for being off, maybe mental health or things like that? So it'd be good to see those trends, and if there are trends occurring, obviously we can then make sure there's interventions early on.
Yeah, we certainly report on broad reasons for absence, and I think we can, although we'll keep those broad reasons from a system perspective, and there's some consistency about how other people report as well in other organisations, so we can get some benchmarking. But I think it's about diving in. So if we take, typically we've had up to 30% of our sickness absence that has been due to stress, mental health, depression, that broad set of categories. Getting under the skin of that to find out what those causes are, and then many and various, but I think probably links to your question, and we will keep doing that once we've got those figures to go.
Thanks, Peter. Dan.
Good morning. I'd like to take you through to page 9. My concerns are the mental health. My concerns are about how do we measure what's going on? Because, you know, as I look on page 9, maintain or increase productivity, whilst also understand the importance of innovation, ways of working. I get all that. But where's the performance? How do we understand indicators? Who are doing what per day? I don't know whether they're working 7 hours a day or is it less than that? I don't know. So I'd welcome to understand that properly. But one of the keys in my mind would be no different to the public if they were suddenly exposed to all of this. What is the implications to all of this? How does it work? So on page 9, I'm really interested to know how we measure a day. How do we know what people are doing in that day? On page 11, mental and physical well-being. I mean, reduce sickness and absence, but how do we know that? We've got no sickness or absence figures available, and now we're talking of other people that we understand there is a lift, and we're trying to understand why people may be absent. But, you know, if we're launching a project on the scale this is, it's costing £4 million spread over the 9 years, it's a big project that we ought to be fully got a grip of it and know exactly what we're doing. I feel that at the moment, I've read through this and minimise redundancies. I see all these benefits here, but I'm just trying to understand, how do we calibrate this? How do we know what's happening? When we look at the staff wellbeing, you know, surveys and different elements that you've got in, but it isn't really what I see is, and it's very good, but there's layers and layers, but where's the real bones? Where do we get down to understanding as an organisation? How do we understand what's happening? When I look at diversity, now we start off on benefit, on any potential discrimination is eradicated. So that means, you know, everybody's at home, so you can't have a problem or behave badly because you're not seeing anybody. And, you know, we're looking to retain on the outcomes, and the council has retained the status to be an employee in the top 100 of Stonewall. All sounds very good, but at the end of the day, when I glance across to the targets are still being worked on due to the links with the ways of working programme. Now, what I would say is there's got to be a rationale. I ran a business in sales and marketing, so I'm used to people working away and senior manager, directors working from home, but we had a calibration. We understood what was expected. We also had reports, so we know. So whether there's a daily report that somebody emails, you know, I've answered the phone 20 times, I've done this, I've done that, I've had inquiries, I'm doing lots of work. There's got to be something where there's realism, because as somebody who interacts with the public, and I go to 8 parish council, they're saying, well, how's this thing going? And at the moment, well, it's all being processed and everything else. But I mean, there will be a time when we've got to be able to look at it really solidly with a little bit more interaction to be able to help us to be understanding. Because if I don't understand it, and I'm a member, so the public have got no chance, and I make comments to try to pacify people who are, well, don't you know what's happening? How many people you got working? What are they doing? And it's embarrassing in some ways. But I think this by now should have some real solid bones in there that we can put the flesh on. We haven't got that. We're playing around with flesh and no bones. So I'd be interested in the comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let me try and address those. I think with when we're measuring people activity, human activity, there's going to be a range of hard measures and soft measures. And you're absolutely right. So in terms of answering the phone, in terms of how long a call takes, so take our customer service centre, we've got the measures. In terms of absence, we will have absence data. It's a blip that we didn't want, but we will get through it, the new system. And we have got plenty of people data. The issue for us is how we use it and who our audiences are. So I'll come back to that. But there are soft measures as well. So when we get feedback around, so our first wellbeing survey that we did during COVID, some nearly 50% response rate, some really valuable stuff on how well people felt the organisation was doing as a COVID response, whether they felt supported, whether they felt included or excluded by their line manager, by their peers, their colleagues, etc. So that soft stuff you can still do something with, but I absolutely accept that there is some bottom line hard evidence that's needed as well. In terms of performance and productivity, so the language that we're starting to use, we are at the start of this. We're moving, and we talked about it separately, we're moving from something that's enforced to something that is an organisational policy and way of working. So we are at the start, but we're starting to talk about managing by outputs and outcomes. So don't manage by presenteeism, don't manage by whether somebody is at a desk for 7.5 hours a day. Manage by what your expectations are and what they produce. Now that's, if you're making widgets, that's easy. You can count the widgets. If they're a policy officer, that's harder because some of the work is longer term. There's research, there's rating reports, etc. You're not going to necessarily say day by day that performance is, but you would look at the end of a period to say, well, they've done the research and produced the reports that go to X committee, whatever it may be. What we're trying to do is focus on performance and productivity. So we absolutely recognise that we've had some questions from members and others around performance and productivity. And what we're trying to do is we'll get managers to look at what they measure now. So, we've all got our dashboards, we've all got our benchmarks, etc. Do those dashboards help us monitor and manage productivity, or do we? And every service is different, so there will be the differences in what's measured, as well as some core corporate measures, if you like. And if they don't help manage or monitor productivity, what's the gap? What is it that's needed? So we will get our service heads and our managers thinking about that, so that actually we can evidence in just day-to-day business as usual, or depending on the type of work, up through scrutiny, cabinet, whatever it may be, the process is depending on the type of work, so that we can actually evidence that this is working. And yes, you're right, the Ways of Working programme has some very broad benefits in it. It has significant investment, but it also has significant financial benefits, but we need to look at the non-financial benefits as well, or the things that are indirect, because if you say, well, we can retain staff, that's an indirect financial benefit, but there's a direct financial saving as well, because we're not retraining people, we're not spending money recruiting, etc., etc. Just an example of where we can start to measure impact, but lots of other factors as well when we're looking at what's happening in the economy, just to use that example. So it's not all around ways of working, it's not all around, one particular factor. But our managers and our leaders are absolutely crucial in this, and we're putting lots of effort into training, coaching, supporting, getting them to think in the right way. This new model. Stop and see if Karen wants to add anything.
No, absolutely, Gordon. I can't disagree with anything, obviously, that you said, because a fundamental part of the people strategy is that programme that we've designed for leaders, managers and supervisors to make absolutely sure that they are able to manage within a hybrid world. And what that means is that they, some will have staff who will be working remotely, some will have staff that aren't working remotely. And if a manager feels that remote working isn't serving its purpose for the particular delivery of that service, then that manager needs to do something about it. But we do have a number of tools that we do use. Managers are under no illusion that they have to do supervision sessions, they have to do annual appraisals, they should have a balanced scorecard in position. So, for example, I'll use people services as an example. So within my balance scorecard, I have a set of staff factors that look at absence, making sure that people do have their return to work interviews if we do have any absence, turnover, etc. I monitor my budget obviously very, very carefully and closely. I also track the key deliverables of my service, one being, is my service delivering the council's people strategy? So I have fortnightly meetings with my senior leadership team. We go through a tracking process and I'm able to do that piece of work, as well as customer feedback in terms of, you know, how our customers, be them internal or external, are finding our service delivery. So we have got some very clear messages in place for our leaders and managers and tools to enable them to manage performance and productivity.
Yeah, could you explain the tools to manage? Because this is the lovely words, you know, we've got protocols, we've got procedures, we've got this, and, you know, how do they actually manage? I mean, I'm listening to it all and it sounds wonderful. You sit back and you think, wow, you know, we're on a journey, you know, we're started, you know, brilliant. But I'm just trying to understand in my mind, how do we actually manage the teams? How are the managers? What guidelines, what instruments have they got? What do they do? You know, because when they're sat in an office or in close to a team of people, they heard, they could see people, they could do all sorts of things. So they knew a lot of what was going on. Now they're in silos. So this is really hard now, because obviously we're moving into a different sort of regime that I think will cause us problems. But I'm interested to hear what your comment is. Thank you.
I mean, communication is absolutely key. And what any manager shouldn't end up doing is having a team that is working within a silo. They shouldn't have individuals at home working, feeling very distant from their work, their agenda, their colleagues. So it's absolutely incumbent upon the manager to manage that situation, and that is through making sure there's daily contact, there's team meetings, there's those supervision sessions. So, for example, one of the tools we have is a supervision document that makes very clear to our managers the areas that they really need to talk about with each of their, you know, their direct reports, making sure that they do cover their work, productivity, what they're achieving, but also how they're doing as individuals regarding their well-being and mental health. So that document, that tool is out there. And I think it's also fair to say that when we produce anything under the people strategy regarding whether it be a tool or a protocol, what we do make sure so far as possible is that when it's introduced to the organisation, it's as thoroughly implemented as we can possibly get it to be. So we do initial launches with our senior leadership teams at our senior briefing, our conferences. Our business partners also introduce it to their DMTs and their senior leadership teams. They hold sessions, and some of those are in person, to go through that particular tool to make sure managers absolutely understand, you know, how vital it is that they adopt it and follow it, because actually being a manager is not easy. It wasn't easy before COVID. It certainly isn't easy post-COVID. But my philosophy is, if managers come on board, and they hopefully are on board, and they adopt what we are introducing under the people strategy, then life as a manager should be hopefully far more straightforward in terms of their responsibilities and accountabilities that they hold in the organisation than what they have been, you know, before. So, as Gordon says, you know, and you've said yourself, you know, it is a journey, but we have done a terrific amount of work. And yes, we'll just have to see where we get with certain outcomes in terms of some of those figures under the Ways of Working programme.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as the lead member for Ways of Working, I've got a few comments to make. All the questions you raised, Dan, are really good questions, and they're all the questions that I raise regularly with officers, team, and Gordon, and every single meeting we have on the update of the programme. one of the standing questions I have is around productivity and ensuring that we have the right measures in place to ensure that we aren't, our performance as a council isn't declining and that we're actually improving and that we're maintaining a good service for our residents. So it's at the forefront of that programme is that we are maintaining our good service to our residents is at the forefront of that, of the focus of that, Dan. As Gordon said, a lot of these suites are being developed, but they're already in place within the respective teams. So I know we've had meetings offline about this informally, and the contact centre was mentioned earlier around, that they've got their own KPIs and, how many calls they're taking, are they resolving customer complaints or queries. So individual teams will have their individual KPIs, and that'll all be brought together and reported to senior leaders in the organisation. So, I don't think we've got, a complete solution and package right now, but I think we're certainly heading in the right direction. And, it's a journey that a lot of organisations are on.
Yeah, I think to me, I've got Richard and Bertie still to ask questions, but I think part of the Building Back Better strategy, I mean, we as an employment committee, if we want to see data reports, statistics, Tableau information, which I think is an excellent way to sort of see what progress is being made by looking across the Tableau historic reports to date. I'm sure we can ask for that and bring that, so we can possibly look at that going forward. Okay, I've got Richard and then I've got Bertie. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter and Dan have been exploring the very points that also much interest me, so I'm grateful for that. And as Peter says, Dan, you've put before us those very questions that I know colleagues have asked and the public ask, and they are fundamental questions. And you've got to find a way of making sure that members and the public at large do understand and are able to, accept, put it that way if I may, the new ways of working, because there is a degree of what's really going on, as you put it down. These are fundamental questions, absolutely right. I completely agree with the point Gordon made about input, output, and outcomes. Input is simply a way of stating how I spent my time. The answer is really, well, so what? It's the outcomes that are really important. And I suppose, obviously, if the outcomes aren't as expected, that leads, doesn't it, from almost management? And where does the problem lie? Is it was the task too big, needs to be redefining, or is somebody simply not actually carrying it out, putting it bluntly? One final thing for me, Chairman. I mean, in pre-pandemic days, these meetings explore attendance and sickness and the reasons and why, what's happening, what's going on. And I know that something I think was mentioned at another meeting, because of the move to remote working, it's possible some people were actually working when they wouldn't have been. They come to the office, you can go to your computer, some people felt, and do things when you couldn't drag yourself into County Hall. So that's an important point, not just the other less pleasant comments, issues raised, should I say, rather. So I just don't understand yet quite why we haven't got the sickness data. Have I missed that point? I'm sorry. Could you just explain that for me?
A couple of things you said, Richard. I think public perception is really important. And there's nothing new about hybrid working, whatever you want to call it. People have been working flexibly in organisations for a decade, perhaps longer. But we've probably worked in a fairly traditional way, so that probably then has an expectation around the accesses, and we have to be really clear with the communication. But obviously, from a public sector, and it's universal services and targeted services are smaller numbers that receive targeted services. But how do we know that we're still delivering levels of service that are needed? And again, so many other factors are impacting on those. Get into other conversations around tension and the crisis that we're in there. So there's a range of measures and factors that we have to consider. Outcomes, absolutely, thank you, is a really important way of thinking. And productivity, you know, we've messed around with definitions of productivity because you can make the processes I work with really efficient. We can take steps out of processes, but actually, if I'm not motivated, whether I'm at home, in a library, in the office, whatever, if I'm not motivated, I'm unlikely to be productive. Bad example because I'm old now. But there's a human aspect to this as well. So we have to make sure that the culture's right and people are motivated so they are productive. And then I think a word you used at the end there, Richard, accountability. You know, you don't want to be waving the big stick all the time, but accountability, you know, what if things don't get done? There have to be consequences. In terms of sickness absence, it's all about work patterns. So, you know, full-time 5 days a week standard work pattern, but we have lots and lots of people on standard work pattern. They have to be put individually into Oracle for Oracle to then draw out sickness absence. So if sickness absence is inputted, it's being dealt correctly with by payroll, and it's counting towards your kind of full pay, half pay, no pay calculations. So that bit of it's okay. It's the link to reporting. So what we're trying to do is to get all the work patterns in, the work schedules in. Mainly it's managers who have to do this, but we're also providing some corporate support. Getting close to it, and we need to make sure that we're tight for turnover, new starters, etc. And that's why we're able now to say, actually, with some accurate data plus some projecting for the gaps, that's why I think we've gone up by between 2 or 2.5 days from where we'd got to. But we will start to produce the more detailed data again.
So I don't want to push you on the spot, but I mean, will it be feasible at our next meeting to have the sort of sickness data we had before, and then we can explore its value and what we can learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next meeting is September. We're just at the point where we're starting to produce data. Yes, there's a couple of caveats with it, but there's always caveats with data because it's as good as what's gone into the system. So we will have a more detailed report for September. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to stick on the input-output subject again. I totally agree outputs are important. We don't necessarily want to micromanage side, but to me, input is important because that is linked to how much effort's gone into generating that output. And then collecting that data is important because if someone's generating a really strong output in half the time, then that person needs rewarding. And if there's a lot of input going into generating an output which could be quicker, then that we need to think about resources. So it's just a very simple question on input. Do we time record and timesheet on certain projects?
I think it's variable. As I say, if you take the customer service centre, we can log by person how many calls are being answered, how long people are taking, etc. So you have a kind of service-wide set of data. But I believe they can bring that down into by person. So therefore, you can training development that's needed, levels of experience, whether somebody is kind of getting through whatever the target may be. I think input's really important. It kind of links to what I probably just said about motivation as well. We need to automate as much as we can. So there's a whole digital program that's running, and some of that will be the way that our customers access us, the channels, and some of that will be our internal processes and automating, digitizing, etc. But then what we need to carry on making sure, and this is kind of business as usual for services, is that we're making our processes internally as slick as possible. And we need to make this is getting a bit ethereal now, but make jobs interesting for people. I keep coming back to the recruitment and retention challenges. We've got to focus on that as well. So inputs are measurable more easily in some areas than others. I would come back and say some of the stuff that Caroline said is managers sit down with their direct reports or anybody who has a management relationship, understand what's happening, go through a range of questions and topics,
from a work perspective, including how people are and how motivated they are, etc. But manage through that process as well as the ad hoc contact. And when we're working in a hybrid way or remotely, make sure that we find ways to connect with people when we're not always in the office seeing people, as a colleague said earlier. So it's probably a bit of a waffly HR answer, but I think it's all really relevant to how we work.
Okay. Yeah, that's one.
So is it fair to say then, really, that might say in with inputs, then you say, okay, here's the result, here's the outcome. So there's a link we're looking for.
I think that link is easier to identify in some areas. So, you know, going back to we don't make widgets, but if we made widgets, you know, the output is a number. It's harder in other areas, but there's also something about, are people skilled to do the jobs? Are they skilled sufficiently? Are they trained to do the jobs that we need them to do? You know, it's not just about training for a next step or for something else. It's also to actually, it's the basics, isn't it? To be able to do the job that you're paid to do. About it. So again, lots of work there, which we've always done.
Thank you all. I think there's some been really good comments, questions and observations there. So we're asked to note the work achieved to date in implementing the Council's people strategy. Does everyone agree? You're happy with that tonight? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Caroline, for that. Next item on the agenda is item 10, which is an update on the pay award. This is on pages 33 to 38 of your agenda pack. Gordon McFarlane will now go through and present the report and provide further update where necessary. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very brief report. This is about last year's pay award, which is three different negotiating bodies: National Joint Council, which is our main grades, grade 2 to 17, Joint National Council for Chief Officers, and Joint National Council for Chief Executives. And as we know from other conversations, the pay award, I've never known it take this long for the pay awards to be agreed. Protracted negotiations and gaps in negotiation. And our process internally is that if we haven't got an employment committee immediately, we look for urgent sign-off to get it into people's pay slips as quickly as possible. And it was even more important last year to do that. And it's then ratified or noted by employment committee. So that's what this report is that sign-off. NJC was 2.75% on the lowest point of the scale. Everybody else 1.75, and then the other two, chief officers and chief exec, was 1.5%. I think there were other commitments made in the NJC deal around reopening some negotiations about term time only working and the terms and conditions associated with that. Trade unions interested in working and any factors around that, but also, you know, and it's all very topical stuff, mental health support, and then looking at maternity and paternity leave. So some of these really important things do get thrown in and caught up with pay negotiations, but it hasn't been a commitment to do anything fundamental before. So we'll have to see how those negotiations or those conversations go around those factors, but they're really acknowledging, you know, the context that we're working in. So we're looking for, I mean, the report says noting, kind of looking for formal sign-off for employment committee retrospectively. If it's okay, Chair, it's not in the report because it's all a bit, you know, right up to date, but we're just going to comment on this year's pay negotiations, if that helps, and just do a verbal update. I think I'll try and keep this brief. There are a range of factors around. There are national living wage increases over the next few years. The cost of living, as we all know, you know, inflation of CPI is currently at 9% today, but I think it's still 9%. And you know, we've got, you know, fuel crisis, etc., fuel cost crisis, etc., etc. So a huge number of pressures at a national level on people's take-home pay, and because of the lateness of the 2021 deal, 21-22. The 22-23 negotiations haven't actually started properly. I think the employers are still waiting for the staff side submissions, which I think will be substantial for obvious reasons. The last year they started about 10%. You can see that starting about at the same point, and whether they get into arguments around bottom loading or other kind of solutions to think about addressing low pay. But you can see that national context playing into local government negotiations, which are standalone. The employers we tend to have regional pay briefings. We've had one with not a lot of information, and there's another one on it's late June, 21st of June. So we should get an idea then about what the staff side claims are and the employer's initial thoughts, and then coming out to talk to individual employers about their views, affordability, etc. And just on affordability, we've tended to budget in the last few years for around 2%. And I think the view this year, and certainly the messages informally coming out of national employers, is those days of 1% and 2% are probably gone. And you can see what's happening in other sectors. And, you know, a sensible budgeting position might be around 4%. So that's quite informal and quite loose at the moment for obvious reasons, because it's pre-negotiation. But it just gives you a sense of where we may be at. And obviously, if, for example, we did settle around 4% or an average of 4%, it's way off what's happening with cost of living. So some challenging times ahead. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Any comments or questions from members? I think it really is just an update. So I think one thing, I know Pete and I were talking, it was just the comment that the full cost of the pay award for 21-22 aren't fully known. Is that because some haven't gone through the system yet, so you haven't been able to pull figures out?
Yeah, apologies for that. Sorry, I meant to mention that. Yeah, we've still got some backdated calculations on allowances and market premium and things like that to do. But I was going to say, depending on whether we include maintained schools and traded services, the figure differs. But if we went with something like 160 million, which is a net figure without schools and without traded services, who should consume their own smoke, if you like, 1% would be 1.6 million. So if you take an average of 1.75%, you're probably talking between 2.8 and 3 million for the pay deal. So you can see, you know, 1.6 million, if we're now talking about 4%, sizable figures that we have to put aside. So yeah, you're right. That was the reason. Should have explained that.
And certainly going forward with the MTFS, I mean, the money's going in and being prepared are sort of sizable, but it's the various options that we may or may not get. So. Okay, thank you. Members were asked to note the action taken in respect to the implementation of the pay awards for NJC and JNC employees and the Chief Executive for the period 1st of April 2021 to 31st of March 2022. So is everyone happy? Okay, thank you. Item 11 is a report on implications of new armed forces legislation. This is on pages 39 to 42 of your agenda pack. Sarah Carter, Communities Business Partner, and Christy Ball, Team Leader in Communities, will present this report. Gordon, shall we go straight to Sarah and Christy? Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really going to hand over to Sarah for the most part of this report, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. I'm not Zafar, and unfortunately does send his apologies. He can't make it today. So as Mr. Brecken has said, I'm the team leader for the communities team, and Sarah Carter is a community business partner in my team and has a responsibility for the Armed Forces Covenant. If any of you require a different conversation or briefing around the Armed Forces Covenant, then of course, please do come and let us know, because we are just talking about this element of the new bill and legislation coming in. Mrs. Posnett is the lead for that piece of work, and we always do feedback and report to her. So I'm just going to pass on to Sarah. It's actually very, very timely that we're coming to you, because there has been a change since the publication of the report with the legislation coming in. But if I hand over straight to Sarah, she has all.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Chair. If I could just talk through some of the main points throughout the report, and we'll come into what Christy said about some changes that have happened within the last few days. So really the purpose to bring this to yourselves today is to make you aware of some implications of the new Armed Forces Bill and how that fits in with the delivery of the wider Armed Forces Covenant pledge that the Council has signed. As in a nutshell, really, the Covenant is a promise to the nation for those who served or have served and their families that they're treated fairly and with respect, and they should face no disadvantage compared with wider citizens around service provision, commercial services. In June 2018, we widened our Covenant pledge in a signing with the City Council and the Cathedral to widen that out to make us a forces family friendly service provider. So we widened our scope to cover carers, spouses, family members, and anyone that would come into contact under that forces family umbrella. So the new bill requires specific public bodies to have due regard, very similar wording to equalities legislation, to principles of the Armed Forces Covenant in 3 named areas at the moment: housing, education and healthcare. And as I mentioned, the expectation is that this will operate in a very similar manner to the public sector equalities duty. It requires evidence-based policy making. In addition to those named areas, other areas can be introduced in due course through secondary legislation, as this motion was passed through the House of Lords. They debated around social care being included, which isn't at this time, but through discussions we anticipate that to be the next area that gets brought into the bill, so we are making preparations. Probably relevant for this committee, the bill also specifically refers to enabling flexible working reserve personnel. And just referring back to point 2 in the report, our reserve forces policy was reviewed as part of this work back in July 21, and it's confirmed that we are compliant with the bill, therefore continues to be fit for purpose and doesn't require amendments at this time, but we will continue to do that. So the change that Christy referred to, the bill did gain royal assent in December 21 and wasn't expected to come into force any time now in June. However, we heard last week that it does need to go back through procedures, and that is not expected to happen until after summer recess. So we're now looking at November at the earliest, possibly end of the year, for this to actually come into force. In addition to the new bill, which essentially would as you know, open us up to sort of legal challenge in addition to reputational challenge, which could happen previously. Our Armed Forces Covenant pledge remains. So the 3, housing, education and healthcare, fall into the bill, but we continue to work towards our wider Covenant pledge. And as Christy mentioned, if the committee would like more details on that, then please do get in touch. Paragraph 8 in the report highlights that in 2020 we were awarded the Employee Recognition Scheme Gold Award by the Ministry of Defence. Important to note that within there, because only 25 organisations in the East Midlands, that includes all employers, have received this. But what it does mean is that we have an important role in advocacy and the way that we conduct ourselves in relation to this. And people do look to us as a sort of an example of best practice. So a bit of the context: in recent years, the government has done a suite of revisions and publication of new papers, which you're probably aware of. The key ones sort of would be the new strategy for veterans and the Reserve Forces review, both of which outline sort of quite radical new plans around how the Ministry of Defence plans to operate within the future, and changes it intends to make, which could have quite a significant impact on our populations and military personnel and their families sitting within our communities rather than behind the wire. The implications around that is that there is increased scrutiny on the work of public bodies around armed forces communities, an increase in population access in our services as military personnel, and an expected growth in the reserve forces, not necessarily in the traditional way, but looking at agile call-up, which would mean that more of our workforce could indeed be reserve forces and called up for shorter or longer periods. So how are we going to implement this? We've got a cross-council officer task and finish group, which was established to look at this and all the areas and how it implements on all departments. We've done a baseline assessment against the bill and how we look at that at the moment, anything we need to do to bring us up to standard. And we've got a working document that we can share across departments to look at what changes we need to make. So, for example, that you can check in policies, reviewing software, to make sure we can capture data and record on that, exploring the pathways of service users across the authority so we don't have to repeatedly ask the question, and also assessing the training requirements of people who have to implement. A number of actions we have already completed in relation to employment. So as we mentioned, the policies have been checked related to flexibility. The HR system has been amended so we can record reservist status within there, similar to the way we do equalities data. Our Employee Recognition Award logo has been branded on relevant recruitment pages and things to show our commitment to the armed forces, and we maintain a relationship with the Ministry of Defence Career Transition Service, so we directly advertise roles to people transitioning out of the force and their families. And as it states, their business partner community is myself, and we'll continue to take this forward. The MOD did assess this bill as having no additional burdens, so therefore we are working to any commitments to be met through existing resources, and we're working with partners in other authorities to see how we can work together to ensure that we have a consistent message around the delivery. So yeah, coming onto the recommendations, really it's just to note the implications of the bill, council as an employer and a service provider, and note the progress towards the compliance with.
Thank you, Sarah. That's yeah, a good overview. I think certainly with Pam being the lead member on this, she's a great ambassador sort of for the armed forces, but with her connections, and I think yeah, Zafra as well. I think you and the team do an excellent job. So, I mean, presumably when the bill goes back through the process and it comes back at the end of the year, that will then come back to the committee with the full implications for us. So we can assume that will happen. Any comments or questions from members? Richard?
Thank you for the report, and I welcome it. I mean, I'm going to speak very loosely now based on no data, but on just what I happen to know from the media. I'm sure you all do. I mean, I don't know how many people are involved, but I do understand some members of the armed forces have great difficulties when they return to civilian life in all sorts of ways we might not at first occur to us. So anything that we can do to assist is obviously very valuable, and thank you very much, and I welcome it.
Yeah.
Yes, very good report. Thank you for that. Do we know how many reservists we employ at the moment? When we were talking of other implications and finance, I was just trying to understand that. Thank you.
We don't have an exact figure at the moment, and we're just launching the ability to be able to record that. We know we do have reservists. There is always a difficulty in data around armed forces and forces family. As you can understand, MOD don't really like to share details of that. But we know that we do have reservists because the reservist and their manager will receive a letter from MOD, and I, through my role, would get advance notifications of if reservists were to be called up for operations. So, for example, through the vaccination programme and COVID.
It'd obviously be well worth knowing all of this, because then we've got an implications factor, so we can be planning ahead if or whatever. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, Gordon, at all? Okay, all right. Members are asked to note that we've had the update on the current action plan, so we have that, and obviously the implications of the new bill on the council as the employer and service provider, and also note the progress towards compliance with the bill. So can I thank Sarah and Christy for their attendance today. Thank you for your report. Which moves us on to the final report on today's agenda, which is the organisational change policy and procedure. This is on pages 43 to 48 of your agenda pack, and Damien, our Democratic Services Officer, is here in the room and will present the report. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a standard report that comes to each employment committee. It's just to update members on current action plans, which contain provision for compulsory redundancy and details of progress on the implementation. Members are just asked to note the report and also the appendices outlining the current and completed action plans.
Questions or comments? If not, happy to note. So, thank you, members. To move on to item 13, as I said earlier, there aren't any items that I decided to take as urgent, and it just leaves me to give you the date of the next meeting, which is 15th of September at 10 AM in this room. So can I thank all members and officers for your attendance? Can I thank Damien for supporting us today? Nice to see Ewan as well in the room, and I'll now close the meeting. Thank you.